Okay, welcome to the Show Up and Lead series. Tabitha McMullan, we are very excited to have you join us and share your perspective on leadership. Would you like to introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah, thank you so much, Nancy, for having me. It's wonderful to be here and be in conversation with you. Yes, I'm the CEO at Form, Building a State of Creativity Limited. That's our full name, but we can just call it Form from now on. And we are Western Australia's largest independent creative organization. We have about 40 people in our team, and we do big things all across the state. We really exist because we believe that creativity can drive economic growth and well-being for communities all throughout the state, where they can express their creativity, express their unique stories, and also build wonderful and livable places. So we have 4 key areas where we work in to deliver on that mission: Aboriginal and Islander partnerships, creative learning, cultural tourism, and creative places and spaces. So that's us in a nutshell.
That sounds like a lot of work, and I imagine there's lots of leadership that exudes through that. Can you share with us what your perception is or your understanding is how we as leaders show up and lead in the work that we do?
Yeah, sure. So I really think that it is individual. There's lots of different ways to lead, and I think it's also depending on the context as well. So for me, I'll speak for myself. I think working in the creative industries brings a lot of complexity with it, and we work across a lot of different things. Sometimes I feel like I'm leading 5 different businesses at sometimes in one organization. So for me, I guess a couple of things before I go into my leadership philosophy that you need to know about me. One, I'm the eldest of 7 children, so I have an overinflated sense of responsibility. And also, I didn't start in the arts. I actually started in the sciences. So I'm a bit of a nerd across a couple of different disciplines. So for me, as I mentioned, that complexity, it's about harnessing that complexity to make a strong system. And in my context, that means how diverse and how robust the relationships are between the team members and between the team and its environment. So it's kind of like the covalent bonds of the team world. So that's my kind of science nerd coming out there. But that's about building trust, collaboration, creativity, and diversity and balance in a team. And when we have that imbalance, I really believe that we can start to turn those wicked problems into awe-inspiring magic. And it really starts with the leader to take responsibility for being part of that system, understanding the system, and making sure that all the people in the team are playing their role appropriately, I suppose. So I value interpersonal skills over technical skills, emotional intelligence, self-awareness, long-term thinking, and I really expect the leaders that I lead to hold me to account on those skills and behaviors as well. And I think finally I'd say that accountability and responsibility really needs to be balanced with motivation for a team. And for me in my space, I think the greatest motivator that a leader can employ is pursuit of a meaningful purpose through a clear vision. So setting the vision, bringing clarity in complexity, and really getting a strong network in those complex environments.
That sounds amazing. So tell me more about the people you lead. How do you get the best out of the people that you lead?
Yeah, so I think the way to do that is really about giving them the opportunities, setting high standards, and then just being available. I think, no one likes a micromanager. So my people are generally looking for those opportunities to step outside their comfort zone, to learn and grow, but to be supported along that journey. So knowing I've got them back, that they're not afraid to fail, that I will support them and help them turn mistakes into learning opportunities. So I like to push people often beyond outside their limits of their comfort zone, but I think that's how you get the best out of people. And it's certainly when I had mentors that supported me, that believed in me that I could do more than I thought I was capable of doing, that's how I grew in my journey as well.
I agree with you. I'm an advocate about mentoring in the workplace. My PhD's in mentoring and how it benefits individuals working within teams and out of teams. And you've given us an example there of how you work with the team that you lead. Can I ask you to think about or share with us your insight working with leaders outside the team who don't necessarily share that passion that you have for creativity and community? Can you share with us some of those circumstances that you deal with and how do you mitigate those?
Yeah, so that complexity that I mentioned earlier, yes. At Forum, we do work across a number of different sectors. Education, we have many resource sector partners. We work in the development industry with public art. So yeah, we come up against many different philosophies and viewpoints. And I guess when I'm working with another leader that may not see things the way that I do, the first thing that I need to do is get really curious about what their perspective is, because there will always be some sort of common ground. And I think this really leans into my core value of collaboration, is how do we actually get past our differences and find those things where we do agree to make something better than either of us could have come up with ourselves. So I actually think that difference is a strength. If you can actually lean into it, get curious, find out where the other person is coming from, and test your own assumptions as well in terms of where you're coming from. So that's how I would handle that.
That's fantastic. In my first book, in each of the books I write, I have mantras. And the first book, I wrote 3 as be curious and not furious, be responsive and not reactive, and then be doing instead of stewing. Because there are some things you just can't control, but what can you do in the remit that you have?
Yeah.
So tell me, when you're dealing with leaders who don't see the great work that you do as a priority, what does a courageous conversation look like in that space? You've talked about curiosity, but can you tell us what you would do more in that space?
Yeah, sure. So I guess in terms of advocating for the work that we do in the communities, I think, so hopefully by the time I'm getting ready to actually put forward my case, I have a bit of an understanding of what's important to this person, this other leader, this decision maker that may not see the value in the arts, but they will inevitably have something in their motivation that links to our work. So, for example, we have a creative learning program where we really advocate for creative and critical thinking within the classroom to prepare students for the future. Now, some people might look at that and think, oh, it's an arts program where they're doing finger painting in the classroom or something like that. They might completely dismiss it. But if I can actually help them to connect with what's so important about the future of education, whether that be, often it'll be a parent worried about the future for their own child, or it could be about the well-being of teachers in their school. They might be a school leader who is completely overwhelmed. And to cut past the noise of everything that they're hearing, how can I present to them a solution to their problem and present creative schools in a way that is going to actually solve a problem for them and also grow our impact as well, which is that kind of win-win. So hopefully that's a good example for you there.
Yeah, that's a mutual reciprocity
That's right.
there.
Yeah.
So tell me, what values guide your leadership decisions, especially in challenging times?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, collaboration is one of my core values. Wonder and awe is also another one of my core values. So I think working together to create something bigger and better than any individual could do is really where it starts. So when things get tough, I think I'm thinking about who does this serve and how can we make it benefit everyone involved? That when I'm leaning into my values, then I feel like I'm kind of in this flow where I can connect all of these different needs and wants and desires of all the different stakeholders involved. Because things often get tough when there's interpersonal conflict 9 times out of 10, really. So how can we turn a conflict into something where we're working together to make something beautiful? Another kind of test for me as well is, I was raised growing up in quite an economically disadvantaged household. So economic empowerment is really, really important for me. So at the end of the day, I feel I'm living in my values when I'm thinking about how does this project, does it benefit someone in need? Is it going to help lift someone into a better position in life? That's where that kind of economic diversification and development part of Forum comes in. It really is a passionate, personal thing for me about how can people have meaningful careers and communities have meaningful work, particularly in the regions, that gives them a better standard of living and also a more meaningful and purpose-driven direction in their life. So those are kind of the key things that I test when I'm kind of feeling a bit wobbly on something or something's hooking me. I kind of come back to that.
And that's great insight. We always, when I'm working with individuals and teams and organisations, I talk about the power of values and applying those values to every scenario. And you have showcased how you live those, and that lived experience is really, really important. Can you share with us a leadership lesson that has been challenging for you, that really gave you insight into working either with the team that you have or with stakeholders? What was a valuable lesson aligned with leadership?
Yeah, I think I can think of a perhaps slightly embarrassing story, but really important one. Was like a very pivotal moment for me in my leadership career. This wasn't with my current team, thank goodness, but a few years back now in a previous role, it was kind of my first big team leading role. And I was given a leadership training program and a coach. And I thought, oh, this is great. I've got my new team. I'm so efficient and everything is ticking along excellently like clockwork. Everyone's delivering outcomes. I'm going to do a 360-degree review primarily with my direct reports and team to see what they think of my fantastic leadership skills and my wonderful efficient management style. So we did the lifestyles type test, and there are, for those that don't know it, it's got 3 different colors, which it kind of represents 3 different attributes it measures you on. So red is aggressive, defensive. Green is passive defensive, and blue is constructive. So I measured myself, gave myself lots of blues. But when the results came back, there was lots of red. People saw me as aggressive and aloof, and they really thought, yes, she can do a good job, but they were missing the human aspect. They really wanted to get to know who I was as a person. And as a fairly introverted person who values efficiency and effectiveness, that was very challenging for me. And just, that kind of cognitive dissonance of seeing myself in a certain light, but not really having listened or understood what my team was asking or needed from me as a leader and what my role was. So I was, of course, devastated, and I was even more devastated when my coach really informed me that the only way to do that was to try and be more vulnerable and share more of myself. So I slowly developed the art of sharing stories about myself, and it's been over many years of practice that I feel comfortable kind of opening up and really knowing that boundary between my professionalism and also sharing who I am as a person so that people can connect and get to know me a bit better. Yeah.
That notion of connection is really important, and it links into the concept of trust. And I often talk about trust and believability, which I dare say in this current situation that we're all in, it's quite the challenge. People are struggling to trust what's on social media. They're struggling to trust what's being said by politicians, and that impacts in the workplace. Can you tell me more about how you foster trust, which then in turn obviously fosters greater collaboration and connection?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, a common misperception about trust is that it's this kind of, particularly in leadership, is that it's these brave gestures, this kind of, over the top kind of charging into battle. But what I've learned is that trust is really built in those small moments. And for me, encouraging fun, play, and interpersonal connection is such an important part of our practice and our workplace. And certainly no one should have me as the kind of boss of fun, but there are other people in the organization who kind of champion all those little moments. But even little things like I will make sure I walk the floor and say hello to everyone in the first thing in the morning, try to remember personal details about their family or where they're at, each individual employee. Individuals in teams really need to build what I call social credit with each other so that things get really tough. They can draw on that reserve. So unlike what I previously thought, expecting people to just kind of continually exchange and transact effort without an interpersonal connection, that's not really realistic. Everything kind of breaks down when the proverbial hits the fan.
That's true. That's very, very true. So then can you take me on a journey of how you've then built resilience in that leadership space? You mentioned that you were an introvert, and so not that you like to hide, but it's your comfort zone. How does resilience work for you in the leadership style that you have?
Yeah, definitely. Well, first of all, I like to have lots of breaks on the weekend where I'm just like with a mug and a mug of tea and a novel and in a dark corner. But that's another story. I think for me, I think it's really important to compartmentalize and to really understand what is within your control. So, and just let go of anything that you can't deal with or control either right now or ever, really. So for me, Eckhart Tolle is one of my, kind of gurus. And, he's been reading his work has been a huge part of my leadership development as well. So letting go of my ego, getting curious, what is really going on here? So I think stress and overwhelm really, I have learned the hard way, really comes from not necessarily a volume of things or stuff or work. It is much more about having a fundamental values clash where you're just using emotional work constantly. So trying to avoid that as much as possible by making sure you are in a values-aligned role at work. If not, just leave. Or if you can make a change in the work, great, make that change. But don't spend time kind of stewing, as you said before, take the action, whether that be putting it aside in a little box, dealing with it in the moment, or removing yourself from the situation. So that's very Eckhart Tollean way of thinking, but that certainly helps me to avoid constantly ruminating about things that I may or may not be able to control.
And that's the thing with leadership. I think there's this perception that leaders need to control everything, and reality is that they can't. And I often talk about the work of Stephen Covey, and we talk about the circle of influence, so what you can control and what you can't control. And you can always control something that's in your remit. Then you can potentially influence what's around that. And then there are some things you actually can't control. But I'm curious, what role do you believe skills like emotional intelligence skills like empathy have in working with the greater community in getting them to seek to understand the value of culture and connection and creativity, maybe because their vision is a little bit different?
Yeah.
How do you bring them in that space through empathy?
Yeah. Empathy is such a key thing, both within the organization and in the community. I think, at Forum we take absolutely a community-led approach, applying kind of the same leadership philosophy within the organization as when we work with communities. So taking the time to really listen, to understand what the challenges that community might be facing might be. And I think because there's often a whole list of primary needs that come before thinking about an art project, really. So then how can we frame a creative endeavor into a solutions-focused outcome and impact for that community, whether it be, children not attending school because of significant socioeconomic barriers or trouble in the home, or really no significant economic downturn, or in the current cost of living crisis, the arts and culture or creative enterprise can actually be an upstream solution for these wicked problems if we sit with community long enough to understand how they actually play out and what the barriers to actually connecting with cultural experience might be, and what those cultural experiences look like for them in an authentic way. So, an example that I like to come back to often is the Giants of Mandurah, which, Mandurah saw many years of economic downturn. There was a lot of antisocial behavior in the youth population, disengagement. Mandurah basically got to a point where it had a pretty bad rap. So bringing a creative project in consultation with the community that really shared the unique values of that place, the Ramsar listed wetlands, the Aboriginal stories, the amazing community spirit that actually exists there, and creating something that the community could rally around and be proud of, as well as driving economic uplift into that community over many years, has seen the reputation and the experience for many people of living there completely change. So I guess having empathy for where that community is at, and not just imposing something on them, but listening and designing that with that community to try and ensure that as many people could benefit as possible. Yeah.
I love what you've shared there. And as a regular visitor to Mandurah, we do visit the giant monsters in the space. Can I ask, in terms of traits, leadership traits, which do you value and respect the most, and why?
I think it's hard to choose just a couple, but I would say, just referring to my earlier comments, like the ability to navigate complexity with empathy, but also with responsibility. So I think, to me, certainly a leader must be empathetic and must be curious and understand the complexity of the individuals and the situations in which they're in. And that does take a high level of empathy and understanding and willingness to kind of be vulnerable and maybe admit that you're not right, that you don't have all the answers, to put the ego at the door, all of those kind of traits that come with being an empathetic leader. But I also think that that needs to be balanced with responsibility. So, I think perhaps we can sometimes swing too far into the empathy camp, which creates a bit of a cult of the me. And I'll maybe tell a little bit of an anecdote. It's not my anecdote, but I loved the work of Daniel Coyle in the Culture Code. And he talks about the story about the San Antonio Spurs coach, Greg Popovich, in a case study. And Greg Popovich had this wonderful kind of framework that could be summed up in this phrase of, I'm giving you these comments because I have very high expectations, and I know you can reach them. So breaking that down, I think you are part of this group. Is kind of the first part of that, and that's the empathy part. It's like, I see you, you belong, I understand you. But then this group is special, we have high standards, and I believe you can meet them, are the responsibility part. So I think otherwise, we just run ourselves ragged as leaders trying to understand and address everyone's individual needs without giving them responsibility of, taking care of them for themselves or speaking up or looking after their fellow team members. So to me, I guess I would say that balance of empathy and responsibility are really, really important.
Perfect. So how then do you grow the people that you lead? How would you grow, for example, an emerging leader? And how would you continue the growth of someone who is a well-established leader?
Yeah, so I think providing those opportunities and knowing when what I can offer them may not be sufficient even. So, I have quite a diverse team of leaders reporting to me, probably too many, story for another day. But they each need something different, and knowing how to adjust my style and approach to meet them halfway and support them in their leadership journey, to really listen and get them to reflect and think about where they're going on their pathway, and then reaching into my network. I mean, I see myself in a role of a CEO as actually just trying to be a homing beacon to try and get as many resources and connections as I possibly can around for the organization, often for funding, but other things as well, like mentors or learning opportunities or courses. How can I kind of draw on my network to provide opportunities outside of our organization and outside my skill set so that they're kind of growing beyond and into the next thing, hopefully within the organization, but not always the case.
But that's okay too, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes we train and grow individuals and that growth may not stay with us, but it moves on to serve someone else. And I think that's the greater good of the community. I have one more question and then I'm going to start like a 10-minute round, short, sharp questions, see what
Sure.
you think.
I'll see how I go.
So if you could change one misconception of leadership, what do you think that would be?
Yeah, so I think it would be about this conception of leadership as being power over. And in fact, it's probably less of a misperception about leadership than it is a misperception of power, in fact. But anyway, I think, with power comes great responsibility. I love that, that adism. And in today's world, more than ever, power over isn't really going to get you very far. But soft power, giving power away, and ultimately taking responsibility for the impact that your power has on others or situations is both a heavy burden and a moral imperative, I think. So, yeah, that's probably the one I would choose.
I agree with you. And Brene Brown's done extensive work in that space.
Yeah, you probably can hear me like quasi-quoting Brene. She's one of my, Eckhart Tolle and Brene Brown, my two kind of gurus.
I'm a devoted fan too. All right, are you ready for rapid fire rounds?
Sure.
I'll minimise some of them. Early start or slow morning?
Early start.
One thing you do before a big gig?
Deep breaths.
What's a favourite way to reset after a big day?
Oh, well, I've sort of given that one away. It's probably sitting on the couch with the lights dimmed with my cat, my daughter, having a cuddle, preferably not saying a word.
Something you're still working on as a leader?
I think knowing when to push and when to take the foot off the brakes, off the gas.
Okay. Window seat or aisle?
Aisle.
Of course. Leadership in one word?
A joy.
Best advice you've ever received?
At the end of the day, kiss the bricks goodbye.
Oh, I love that. I love that. What's one thing that every team needs?
Rest and recuperation.
And trust is built by?
Remembering the name of a person's dog.
Tabitha McMullan, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom on the Show Up and Lead series.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Nancy.